Welcome to History Love, where we explore the stories, people, and events that shaped our world. Let's dive into the past and uncover history's most fascinating moments. The Second Battle of Bull Run, a symphony of strategy and chaos. August 1862. The summer heat scorched the Virginia countryside as two massive armies prepared for a showdown near a small stream called Bull Run. The Second Battle of Bull Run, known to the Confederates as the Battle of Second Manassas, was about to unfold, a clash that would define the audacity of Confederate strategy and the peril of Union missteps. The Northern Virginia Campaign, a prelude. By the spring of 1862, Confederate forces, under the command of General Robert E. and his lieutenants Stonewall Jackson and James Longstreet, had turned the tide of the war in Virginia. Union General George McClellan's failed Peninsula Campaign left the North reeling. In its aftermath, General Henry Halleck ordered McClellan's Army of the Potomac to unite with General John Pope's newly formed Army of Virginia. Until the merger, Pope was tasked with guarding Washington, D.C., and countering Confederate forces in central Virginia. But Lee was not one to wait. With Richmond secure, he turned his attention to Pope. Lee's plan was daring and unconventional: divide his forces to outmaneuver a numerically superior Union army. Jackson's dash to Manassas. On August 25, Jackson set off on one of his most famous marches, leading his foot cavalry around the right flank of Pope's army. His troops covered an incredible 54 miles in just 2 days, arriving at Bristow Station on August 26. That evening, they descended upon Manassas Junction, the Union supply depot. After routing the Federal defenders, Jackson's men feasted on captured supplies before setting the depot ablaze. Pope, now aware of Jackson's position, scrambled to respond, believing Jackson was retreating. The battle begins. On August 27, a brief but fierce skirmish erupted at Bristow Station between Union General Joseph Hooker and Confederate General Richard Ewell. Though the Confederates held their ground, Ewell withdrew to join Jackson at Manassas. Pope pursued, only to find the smoldering remains of his supplies when he arrived. Meanwhile, Jackson had slipped away, taking up a hidden position in the hills between Groveton and Sudley Springs, close to the site of the First Battle of Bull Run. Pope misjudged Jackson's intentions, assuming he was retreating toward Thoroughfare Gap. In reality, Jackson was lying in wait for reinforcements. Longstreet arrives. On August 28, Jackson's troops clashed with Union forces under Brig General Rufus King near Groveton. The fighting was vicious, and King's division was forced to retreat. That same evening, Longstreet's corps arrived at Thoroughfare Gap, driving back Union General James Ricketts, who had been tasked with blocking their advance. By the morning of August 29, Lee's army was reunited, forming a strong defensive position. Day 1. The Union's blunder. Believing Jackson to be isolated, Pope launched repeated assaults against his lines on August 29. Division after division surged forward, only to be repelled by Jackson's entrenched troops. Meanwhile, Longstreet's corps positioned themselves on Jackson's right flank, unnoticed by Union scouts. By day's end, the Union army had suffered heavy casualties without making significant gains. Day 2. The Confederate counterattack. On August 30, Pope, convinced that Jackson was retreating, ordered a massive frontal assault. Union troops charged into a deadly trap. Longstreet, now fully deployed, unleashed a devastating counterattack. His artillery raked the Union lines as Confederate infantry surged forward, driving the Federals back in disarray. The Union retreat quickly turned into a rout, with Lee's forces pressing their advantage. By the evening, the Union Army was in full retreat toward Washington, leaving behind thousands of dead and wounded. The aftermath. The Second Battle of Bull Run was a resounding Confederate victory. The Union suffered approximately 14,000 casualties to the Confederacy's 8,000. For Lee, the victory paved the way for his first invasion of the North, culminating in the Battle of Antietam. For Pope, it was a humiliating defeat. He was soon relieved of his command. Legacy of the battle. The Second Battle of Bull Run showcased the brilliance of Confederate strategy and the chaos of Union command. It was a testament to Lee and Jackson's ability to outmaneuver and outthink their opponents. Yet, it also foreshadowed the enormous bloodshed and destruction that lay ahead. For the soldiers who fought and died in the fields of Manassas, it was a harrowing chapter in a war that would continue to tear the nation apart. The first day, August 29, 1862. Stonewall Jackson's Confederate Corps, entrenched behind a strategic railway embankment, was ready for battle. Early in the day, Union General Franz Sigel launched 2 sharp attacks, both of which were repelled by Jackson's forces. By noon, General Pope arrived with reinforcements from Centreville. Joined by divisions led by Generals Hooker and Reno, Pope personally directed a third assault on Jackson's line. The Confederates barely held their ground, but Jackson's counterstroke overextended his troops, forcing them back after a fierce charge by General Grover's brigade. Throughout the afternoon, Union forces made further attempts to dislodge the Confederates. The fourth assault, led by Grover, ended in devastating losses. A final attack, carried out by Generals Phil Kearny and Isaac Stevens, temporarily drove back Jackson's left. However, a swift counterattack by Confederate General Jubal Early, culminating in a bayonet charge, reclaimed the lost ground. While these skirmishes unfolded, the lead elements of Longstreet's corps began arriving on Jackson's right flank. Union Generals Porter and McDowell, operating under confusing and conflicting orders from Pope, assessed the growing Confederate presence. Porter, tasked with attacking Jackson's right, hesitated due to the arrival of Longstreet. Instead, Porter held his position, inadvertently preventing Longstreet from advancing further that evening. By nightfall, Lee had reunited his army on the battlefield, setting the stage for a decisive engagement. The second day, August 30, 1862. Despite evidence of a growing Confederate presence, Pope misjudged the situation. Convinced Jackson was retreating, he ordered a general pursuit. Jackson had indeed withdrawn slightly, but it was a calculated maneuver to lure Union forces into a trap. McDowell, realizing Pope's error, attempted to secure the vulnerable Union flank by occupying key positions, including Bald Hill and Henry House Hill. Union General Fitzjohn Porter's assault on Jackson's right, as ordered by Pope, met with disaster. Devastating enfilading fire from Longstreet's artillery decimated Porter's forces, halting the attack. Shortly after 4 p.m., Lee launched a massive counterattack. Longstreet led 28,000 men in one of the largest massed charges of the Civil War, targeting the Union left flank. Simultaneously, Jackson pressed the Union right. The relentless Confederate advance overwhelmed Union positions, with Longstreet capturing Bald Hill and Jackson pushing toward Matthews Hill. The Federal Army, driven back to the banks of Bull Run, made a final stand on Henry House Hill. Brigadier Generals John Reynolds and George Sykes rallied their troops to delay the Confederate advance, enabling the Union Army to retreat under cover of night. The aftermath. The Union Army, battered and disorganized, fell back to Centreville. Although reinforced, Pope faced relentless pressure. On September 1st, at the Battle of Chantilly, Confederate forces killed Kearny and Stevens, further demoralizing Union troops. Pope withdrew to Washington, leaving Lee and his army as undisputed masters of Eastern Virginia. Casualties and impact. The Union brought 70,000 men to the battlefield against Lee's 55,000. Total casualties exceeded 22,000, with Union losses at 13,824 and Confederate casualties at 8,353. Longstreet's grand charge on August 30th accounted for over 4,000 Confederate losses in just 4 hours. The Union defeat exposed glaring deficiencies in leadership and coordination. Pope blamed Porter for failing to execute an attack on Jackson's right. Porter argued that Pope's orders were vague and impractical. Following a court-martial, Porter was dismissed from service, a verdict he spent decades contesting. Pope, too, faced repercussions. Relieved of command, he was reassigned to the western frontier. The Union Army, demoralized and fractured, retreated to Washington, while Lee prepared for his bold invasion of Maryland, setting the stage for the Battle of Antietam. Legacy. The Second Battle of Bull Run highlighted the brilliance of Confederate strategy under Lee and the consequences of poor Union coordination. For the South, it was a triumphant moment. For the North, a bitter lesson. It underscored the need for stronger leadership and unity, both on and off the battlefield, in the war that would continue to shape the nation's future. Thanks for joining us on this journey through history. If you love this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to History Love. Together, let's keep the love for history alive. See you in the next chapter.